We head into the wilderness looking for solitude, but sometimes we find something else. Something that feels like it's been waiting for you. That rustle of leaves isn't always a squirrel, and the figure you see in the distance, not always another hiker. We look for an escape in nature, a place we see as beautiful and quiet. But that quiet can be incredibly deceiving. From the silent, chilling aftermath of a fatal accident to the slow-burning horror of realizing you're being stalked. These 4 stories are a terrifying reminder that the most dangerous predator often walks on 2 legs. Each account you're about to hear comes from a real hiker who went into the wild, and in some cases, barely made it back to share their story. These aren't tales of ghosts or monsters. They're about something far more real and unsettling. The darkness you can find in other people. Story 1. The Silence of the Creek. For 2 friends, it was supposed to be the perfect day. Just an easy, sunny trail. The kind you take to wash off the work week and just soak in the peace of the forest. The air was warm, birds were out, and the conversation was easy. They stopped for lunch by a scenic overlook, feeling totally relaxed and miles away from any kind of danger. It was on the way back down that their perfect day started to fall apart. It started with something small, something that just felt wrong. There, half in and half out of the shallow water of a creek, was a single climbing shoe. It was one of those expensive, specialized shoes, not something you'd lose by accident. It just sat there, water flowing around it, a weirdly lonely object in the middle of nowhere. They pointed it out, shrugged, and kept walking, but the sight left a weird feeling in their gut. The trail kept following the creek. A few hundred yards later, one of them spotted another flash of color that didn't belong. This time it was a backpack wedged between 2 boulders in the water, and that's when they saw it. The source of their unease, made horribly real. Just downstream from the pack were 2 people, tangled in rope and still in their climbing harnesses. They were completely still. The hikers froze. It felt like the entire forest went silent around them. It was a man and a woman. It was obvious they hadn't been there for long, but it was also obvious they were gone. But the most chilling part came moments later. Looking at the sun, they figured the fall must have happened just a few hours earlier. It happened while they were sitting at that overlook, enjoying their lunch, with no idea what was going on just down the creek. They had been close enough to hear a shout, a scream, the sound of falling rock, but there was nothing, just the normal hum of the forest. The whole tragedy had unfolded in absolute silence. They hiked the rest of the way back in a total daze. The image of those 2 climbers burned into their minds. A surreal, horrifying reminder of how fast and how quietly a life can be lost in the wild. Story 3. The Archer in the Woods. For a small group of friends on the Pacific Crest Trail, the day was ending perfectly. They'd found a great spot near a campground. The sky was turning orange, and they were ready for a hot meal and some rest. The vibe was peaceful, exactly the kind of evening that makes all the sore muscles worth it. That peace was shattered by shouting. It wasn't someone calling for help. It was a string of angry, incoherent cursing. They looked over and saw a man in a nearby clearing yelling at the setting sun. He looked disheveled, and his rage just seemed to radiate into the empty space around him. The hikers gave each other uneasy looks. You see weird people on the trail, but this felt different. This felt unhinged. They tried to ignore him and went back to setting up their camp, hoping he'd just run out of steam. Then, they heard a sound that turned their unease into pure fear. A sharp, mechanical thwack, followed by the whistle of something cutting through the air. The man was holding a crossbow. He had just fired a bolt straight up into the sky. The hikers just stared, completely frozen. They were camped next to a guy with a deadly weapon who was acting completely erratically. That bolt had to come down somewhere. They had no idea what he was planning. Was he just blowing off steam? Was he having a mental health crisis? Or was this something worse? They weren't about to stick around to find out. The decision was instant and unanimous. They had to go. As it got dark, they started packing up with frantic, silent speed. Every rustle of a sleeping bag sounded like a gunshot in the quiet woods. They didn't dare turn on their headlamps, terrified the light would get his attention. They abandoned their plans for a good night's sleep, slipped away from the campground, and hiked for another hour in the pitch dark, hearts pounding the whole time. They finally found a hidden spot way off the trail to stealth camp, hiding their tents as best they could. Nobody really slept. Every sound, a falling pine cone, the wind, made them think the crossbow man was coming for them. The night wasn't spent resting. It was spent on high alert. A chilling example of how quickly one person's disturbing behavior can destroy your sense of safety. Story 4: The Invitation. To two exhausted hikers on the Pacific Crest Trail, the cabin looked like a mirage. After a long day of brutal climbs in the hot sun, it was a welcome sight. They were low on water and just wanted a moment to rest. As they got closer, a man came out of the cabin. At first, he seemed friendly, a nice surprise in the middle of nowhere. He smiled and asked how their hike was going. Then came the invitation. "You two look beat. Why don't you come inside for a cup of coffee?"
The hikers, not wanting to get delayed, politely said no. They just wanted to get a little further down the trail before dark. But the man's friendly vibe started to change. "No, really," he insisted. "You should come in. I just made a fresh pot." There was an edge to his voice now, a kind of desperation that set off alarm bells. They refused again, more firmly this time, and started to back away. The man's face went dark. The friendly mask just fell away, and it was replaced by something cold and threatening. His tone wasn't an invitation anymore. It was a command. I said, "Get inside." In a split second, the situation went critical. The man reached behind his back and pulled out a handgun. He raised it, not pointing it directly at them, but holding it in a way that made it clear there was no more discussion. "Get inside. Now," he said, his voice sharp. Absolute, cold fear washed over the hikers. They were miles from anywhere, completely alone and at the mercy of an armed, unstable person. No one could hear them scream. No one was coming to help. Running wasn't an option. Fighting wasn't an option. All of their choices had been taken away. So they did what he said. With the gun on them, they walked toward the cabin, their minds racing with all the horrible things that could happen. Every step was a step into a nightmare they might not wake up from. The man followed right behind them, and as he shut and locked the door, the click of the deadbolt sealed them inside with their captor. They survived what happened next, but the memory of that moment, of being forced at gunpoint into a stranger's cabin in the middle of nowhere, is a horror that never leaves. It's the ultimate, terrifying proof that sometimes the biggest dangers on the trail aren't the cliffs or the animals, but the people you meet. The experiences you've heard tonight aren't just stories, they're warnings. They're a reminder that while the wilderness can be a sanctuary, it can also be a place where we are incredibly vulnerable. Thank you for listening. If you have a story of your own you'd be willing to share, you can submit it to the email in the description below. And if you want to hear more true, disturbing stories, please consider subscribing to the channel and turning on notifications. It helps more than you know. Stay safe out there. And never forget that sometimes the most frightening things aren't what go bump in the night, but the ones that smile and offer you a cup of coffee.